Alrighty. So today we're here to talk about enhancing the Blazor app quality with Playwright for .NET. So the reason I want to show Blazor is because we deal with Blazor for some of our clients, and it makes sense for us to show that you can test your Blazor app. Playwright for .NET, we'll talk about what is Playwright, and specifically how do we use it in the .NET world for testing our Blazor apps. All right, so our goal in this webinar is we're going to look at the Blazor app itself. Then we'll talk about getting started with Playwright. And then I have a few demos I'm going to show. If time allows, we'll get all the way down to testing with different browsers, but if not, I will make sure that we have other videos available afterwards. And then we'll cover best practices, and then we have a few slides on how you can get in touch with us afterwards. As you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute, and we will address them. Please note that this session is being recorded and is made available after the recording is ready. So if you do not want to be recorded, please leave, and then you can get the recording afterwards. But if you don't mind being recorded, you will be fine to stay. All right, so we're going to talk about the sample Blazor app. What are we working with? So for today's demo, it's using .NET 8. This is the Blazor web app template. I removed the weather part out. Forgot to update the slide on it, but then I also added a couple more pages using Blazor's controls. So a lot of our work that we deal with Blazor, a lot of the clients I deal with Blazor as well. So that's why we're using Blazor. Again, testing Blazor applications. What does it look like? Now, when I set up my Blazor web app, just so you can see, these are the settings that I did for this demo. So these are all straight out of the box. So .NET 8 for our long-term support. I'm not dealing with any authentication in this case. You may have that in your own system. Default for HTTPS. We're doing server, render mode, and then we're going to look at these things per page and component. And then I'm going to show a drag and drop demo. And as you can see, I'm actually taking a dragon and dropping them from one pen to another. So we'll take a look at how do you test for something like this? How do you test drag and drop? Because that isn't always an easy thing to do with other testing tools. So we'll look at how Playwright deals with it. But first, let's talk about getting started with Playwright. So what is Playwright? Playwright's a testing framework they like to stress for modern web apps. So Blazor is considered part of the modern web apps thing, but honestly, if it's a web page in general, it's fine. They have APIs available for different languages and platforms, including .NET, Python, Java, TypeScript, and JavaScript. You can use it to test across multiple browsers, and I'll show you toward the end. I have a demo to show you how you do this for Chromium versus Firefox versus WebKit. So these are the three that it supports. You can run this on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. The demos I'm doing today are running on Windows. However, if you have Linux or Mac OS, rest assured that they claim that this works over there as well. It does have support for mobile and responsive web emulation. However, since this webinar is only an hour, I can only show so many features, so this will not be covered in today's webinar. Headless or headed modes are available. I will show those when we do a few of our demos, so you can see what is headless versus what is non-headless. Some other features that I really like to see with Playwright is that it's got its own automatic retry built in. For the .NET API that we're working with today, all the commands are built with the automatic retry. Now, that means that you're not having to write thread sleeps or waits or any of the other grossness we've seen in tests. We're waiting for the UI to load. Playwright handles that for us. And it will wait until an element is visible and enabled, so it will do the waiting. We don't have to write any of that and try to play the numbers game of, okay, do I have to wait a second? Do I have to wait milliseconds? We don't need to worry about that. There is the ability to trace through your tests, and I will show some of the debugging tools that we use with that. Now, when I looked at the other APIs for Playwright, because being the polyglot that I am, I had to peek and see. Things like TypeScript and JavaScript are better. They have a lot more options, so it's better developed. And so you'll see some of those, they will have non-retry assertions, and it is called out in their documentation that that these particular ones do not do retries. The other thing is that some of them are called soft assertions. The soft assertions, what's nice about those is you can have multiple assertions in your test to check different conditions, but it's not a hard fail as soon as one of those fails. So it'll check multiple conditions based on your expects or your asserts. And then it'll go, okay, we failed on this one, we passed on this one, we failed on this one. As soon as the test is done, then it'll show it failed and here are the reasons why it failed. I won't have a demo of that because that is not available in .NET, but know that these are a thing and they make testing a little bit easier to manage. Now, when it comes to .NET and Playwright, there are two frameworks that they support for testing. That's NUnit and MS Test. The demos I'll show today are using NUnit. And by default, it is headless, which means that when you tell it to run the tests, you're not going to see it open the browser and then close the browser. It's just going to run headless. It's going to do the browser things that it does. Now, there are multiple ways that you can run the tests, either headless or not headless. One of the ways you can do it is using .NET Test and passing in the launch options. I need to call this out explicitly because I have seen this and I have run into it myself. When you do the command .NET Test, it's a space and 2 dashes or 2 hyphens, and then another space, and then it's playwright.launchoptions. Whatever your launch options are. There are spaces on either side of the double dashes or the double hyphens. Make sure you remember that, because if not, you'll go to run the command where it's .NET Test and like the page right up against the dashes. That'll throw an error. It'll be like, oh wait, what's going on here? Oh, I missed that space. So again, if you're running .NET Test, it's this space right here to remember. So double dash, space, and then the launch options. In this particular example, we're doing the headless equals false. That way, when it runs a test, you can see the browser open and then close once it's done running. All right, so for the demos today, I've created a project for the system under test. You'll see the abbreviation SUT, that's what that stands for. And then you have a project for the tests. We build the solution. For installing the required browsers, this is the first time you run the Playwright install script, and I'll show you where that's at. But once you install the required browsers, then you can run your system under test, and then you can write your tests and then run the tests. Now, I'm taking the approach of Playwright and end-to-end and assuming that your code is already written. So this isn't test-driven, but this is testing around the code. I'm very particular when I talk about TDD versus testing around code. This is not going to take a TDD approach necessarily. We're big on TDD here, but that's not what today's webinar is about. We'll take a look at there's a folder in my solution for solution items. There's a file there called .run settings. This is specifically to work with Visual Studio's tests menu. So the tests and debug tests, and I'll show you how that works. You'll see it's XML. Unfortunately, I don't get cool AutoSense IntelliSense to help me with this, but it works for what we need. Now, when you're just getting started with Playwright, you want to start the commands in a PowerShell environment. And the reason you need to do that is because to install Playwright, you'll add the reference to Playwright, and then you have to run this PowerShell script space install. Since it's in PowerShell, I'm warning you now to make sure to start this in PowerShell, or at least where PowerShell is in your path to be executed. Once you have your Playwright installed, keep that PowerShell terminal handy, because there's a feature called code generation or Codegen that you'll want to take advantage of when you're just getting started with Playwright. There's something else here called Try Playwright. Think of it as a playground. So they have different ways of working with Playwright and its various SDKs. And so you can see, how do you do this with Playwright for Java? How do you do this for Playwright for .NET? How do you do this for Playwright for TypeScript? Each of the different APIs have different samples, so feel free to check out Try Playwright to see what other capabilities there are, in addition to what I'll show in today's demos. And code generation is also a thing, so I will show you a demo of this, which is pretty cool. On how do we work with code generation? Basically, you're going to call that Playwright PowerShell script, pass it Codegen, and then you can also pass it a URL. I say URL optionally because you can just run Playwright Codegen and it'll open a browser, and we'll show you what that looks like as well. What's nice with the code generation, so it's going to open up a browser, it's going to open up a recording thing, and you walk through the steps of, okay, if I were the user, I would need to click on this thing and then this other thing. And then if I click on this button, does this label update? For example, one of the examples we'll show is the standard counter demo that comes with Blazor. So you click a button and the text, it shows that you've clicked the button X amount of times. So you can test when I click a button, does that text change? It should be whatever you expect it to be. So we'll look at that test. But Codegen is nice because it will generate what are known as locators. So how do you find an element in terms of Playwright? The code generation will tell you how to refer to that element. Now, something to keep in mind with code generation is it is specifically to generate the code for the actions that you take. It is not going to generate the assertions. So that's something you'll have to take care of. I am going to show you a demo of Codegen where we walk through actions. And I'll point out some of the gotchas along the way. Another feature that I really like of Playwright is their debugging. If there's anything you know about working with me, it's that debugging is something I love walking people through because it helps you to figure out, where's my problem? What's going on? So Page.PauseAsync is how we will do it with .NET. And it allows us to jump into this thing called the Playwright Inspector and walk through our steps and seeing, okay, does this look right? All right, so let's go into the demos. Any questions so far? Okay. So you should see my Visual Studio. So Cameron has a question of, are there any overlaps and patterns that you can use in Selenium, or that you can use in Selenium here? So I don't have a good demo for this because I haven't found the source of it, but they did a demo of Playwright. I want to say it was .NET Conf 2022, or maybe it was one of their community updates. They do public community updates as well, but the guy was walking through it and he has a page class. And page classes are a pattern that I use when I do a lot of the front end testing. And so you could use the page class pattern in Selenium that we could use here. So with the page classes, it will automatically have things like the URL, the base URL is stored in that base page class, and then anything that is consistently used across the tests. I was kind of bummed that I couldn't show that today, but I didn't have enough of a context behind some of his code, so that's why I didn't bring it in here. Now, in my Visual Studio, you're going to see, I have a few things. You know what, let me collapse these so you can see what I've got. So I've got this solution. I've got my demo Blazor app. This is that Blazor app I was mentioning with my Blazor controls. I have some Blazor tests. And then I have my solution items. I'm going to close all of these. I'm going to shrink this area a little bit. Maybe, there we go. Okay. So first things first, because I'm in Visual Studio, I want to show you the run settings. So when I'm running Selenium, or Selenium Playwright, Cameron's question on Selenium is in front of me. Let me close that. There we go. So when I'm running Playwright, I need this run setting so that when I go to test and run all tests, these run settings will tell it how I expect it to run. So I'm going to tell it to run. In this case, I want it to use Chromium because that's the browser I normally use. It's going to pull it from the MS Edge channel. This channel is specifically used with Chromium. I'm going to tell it go ahead and run it headless. Now just choose, so you can see the tests. I'm going to go to the Test Explorer. And you're going to see successful tests because I was running this yesterday. And I have 2 sets of tests, so I'll have a counter and I'll have a drag and drop. Before we even look at the test, let me show you the app in action. So I'm going to go ahead and run the app. And I'm going to bring it over to the screen so you should be able to see the hello world. This is the standard Blazor application. I did take out the weather reference here, but we still have the counter. And so when I click the button, I'll zoom in so you can see that the count updates. That's a standard Blazor demo. These other two, so I have one I call drag and drop. So when I was figuring out how do I want to demo drag and drop or drag and drop feature in the browsers, my brain shortcutted that to dragon. So we have emoji and we have a dragon. And so I'm going to show you in the test how we can automate it so it can move the dragon. It can ensure that the dragon is here. And we can move the dragon back and ensure it's in this collection. So that's going to be our drag and drop demo. Then I have a registration form. So a few of us here are tech event organizers, be it user groups or conferences. And so this particular demo is based off of what we have in Blazor for forms. So I would say something like, my name is Saduki. My email is test@test.com. Maybe let's just leave it at test@test. That seems to pass the regex. For password, you can see that it has to be a certain amount of characters. It has to have a capital letter. So we have validation in place, as well as my bad formatting at the pre-tag, because that doesn't belong in there. But we try. But then I also do things like, okay, meal preference. And yes, I agree to follow the code of conduct. And then if I go ahead and tell it to validate, you'll notice, hey, I have to select a meal preference as well. I could say something like, maybe I'm fasting, so I don't need a meal. And validate, and then you can see I still have some password issues. So we'll talk about using Playwright to go ahead and validate that things are getting there. For the registration form, because there's so much going on, that's when I want to show you what it does for code generation. All right, so those are our applications. I'm going to stop that. The reason why I'm going to stop that is because we're going to have it running in the background. We don't need to deal with debugging the front end at this point. So I'm going to go into my developer PowerShell. And you'll see I'm in my Playwright Blazor demo. I'm going to do a list stuff or ls. And I want to go into my demo Blazor app test folder. And then in my bin folder, debug, this is .NET 7 because I was running into some issues with .NET 8. They are currently working on some of the features there still. So, and then if I do a list stuff there for Playwright star, there's Playwright.ps1. So Playwright.ps1, if you remember, I mentioned when you're getting started with this, one of the first things you need to do is you create your test project. But then in the test project, so my Blazor test project, I have a dependency on Microsoft.Playwright, and I am using NUnit, so I have a reference on Microsoft.Playwright.NUnit as well. Once those are there, then you can come into, it's the bin, debug, net, whatever your version is, .o, and then you do /Playwright, and then space and install, and that will install Playwright. Just so you can see, I already have it installed, but it would do its thing here. We'll come back to this. As you noticed in the slides, I said, once you install this, hang on to this terminal. Hang on to your PowerShell because you're going to need to come back to it. All right. So I've shown the run settings so that we can run this in Visual Studio. The next thing I want to show, so we've looked at the application, let's look at the tests. So in my Solution Explorer, I have a tests. And in my tests, so we've got our global which is automatically using NUnit framework. And then we're going to look at the counter test first. This is what I call a simple web interaction. And the reason why I do that is because, well, you click a button and you check the text. Now, my tests are going to refer to a page class. My page class is very simple at the moment, and that's just because there's nothing else that I need to do. So I'm going to jump into there. I just pressed F12 to jump into it. And you can see that so this is my custom page class, and it's going to inherit from the base page class. So the page test, which is part of Microsoft.Playwright.NUnit, so that's going to host a lot of the logic for, in this case, this is where I'm going to put my base URI. This is where if I had a common setup or a common teardown routine, I would put those in here. And then the demo that I saw, they showed it was using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core testing. It's a testing reference, and they were able to do the web application factory and inject into that. I don't have that set up in here, but it was an approach that they did. All right, so this is where I'm storing that root URI. That way I only have to change it in one spot and not have to update all of my tests. All right, so the counter test is going to inherit from that. And I'm specifically looking for the counter. Now, if you remember, there was a slide for Page.PauseAsync. I have it commented out so you can see what happens with the test running straight as is. And we've got the go to async. So this is going to go to the URL. Now, when it comes to working with Playwright and picking out elements, they're going to discourage you from going the CSS route or through like any of the extended CSS selectors. And the reason for that is because they want you to test what the user sees. They want to be able to test it in a way that whatever they're seeing is testable. So in this particular demo, you're going to see get by role, and it's going to look for an ARIA role of link. And well, what does this stuff actually look like? So, you know what, let's run this so you can see what those ARIA roles are. So if we go to counter, I'm going to right click and inspect. We want to inspect the click me. And you'll see here that it's just a button. There's a P with a role of status. That's the ARIA role status. We go back to our Visual Studio. So you have the ARIA role of link and the ARIA role of button. So it finds a link that has the name counter. It'll find the button that has the name click me. It will find the element that has the role of status, and it'll check to see that it is current count of 1. So if you remember when I was looking at the browser that you saw the role equals status, that's this ARIA role.status. All right, now I can't run my tests and my app at the same time in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this, and we're going to start the application. So I'm going to my other developer PowerShell. Maybe. All right, fine, open it here. And going into my demo Blazor app, I'm going to do a .NET run here. All right, so .NET Run. So my application is running on localhost 5266. Now, if I had changed to some other port, all I would have to do is come into my Blazor test, my Blazor page test class and change my root URL. Here, I don't have to go into each one of my tests and update the base URL. So this is why I take this approach of having a base page class. So there's a question about CSS selectors or XPath. They highly discourage it. However, there is some support for it. When we get into the code generation part, you'll see how it generates the selectors, or what they call the locators, for the HTML elements. So the term you're going to hear in Playwright land is locator, and we'll look at what those locators look like. All right, so we have our 5266 there. So I'm going to go into my test and run all tests. I'll go over, you can see that it's running down in the bar, bring up my test explorer, and everything is passing. My counter, you can see that it should increase when the button is pressed, is passing. Now suppose we wanted to debug in that and see what that looks like. I can go into my counter test and uncomment the await page async. I'm going to go ahead and run all tests. And that's fine for what it's doing. Oh, because I told it to run. Let's tell it test and debug all tests. I wonder if our headless is messing with things. So I'm going to go into run settings. And this is no longer going to be headless. I want to see it open the browser. And test. And debug all tests. There we go. There's my Playwright Inspector. All right, you see the Playwright Inspector? I'm going to zoom in the font a little bit so we can read it. So this is what they call the Playwright Inspector. You can see that we are paused on await page pause async. And so now I can step through each one of these steps to see how it's going to do these things. So let's go ahead and tell it to skip over this step. And so it's going to now go to the URL. And that red dot, so you can see how it's starting to locate things. So it's going to look for the link named counter and click it async. So I didn't have to tell it in the URL to go to counter. I could tell it just go to the root and then have it do the navigation. The next step is going to be finding that click me button to call it, and then to click it async. And then when it clicks that, then we expect that the status will change. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it to run. And notice it did the click, and then current count is 1. Check the expect. No source available. Go ahead and run it to finish. And we have 2 tests pass. So you can step through your Playwright tests using that Playwright Inspector. When you're using Playwright for .NET, you are specifically using this Page.PauseAsync. And what I had to do, because it wasn't coming up, is I had to go into my run settings and change my headless from true to false. When I changed it from true to false, that meant I need to see the browser. I need to see the steps that you're running. Sometimes you trust the code. Sometimes you're skeptical and you want to see it in action. So that's why I put those pauses in there. Now I'm going to comment that pause out so we don't hit this on the next demo. So again, with Playwright, this is you're testing the front end. You're doing step by step, for example. You can't do snapshots. Different APIs offer different sets of capabilities. .NET, this is the basics that we're working with here. All right, so the next demo I want to show is going to be the drag and drop. Now the drag and drop, so I go to my Solution Explorer, my drag and drop test, and I call it drag and drop. This also shows you can use emoji in code, but don't do it unless you actually have a legitimate use for it. I'm doing this in demo code, but in production code, I probably would not be using emojis unless that particular project was around emoji. Okay, so again, I'm using the Blazor page test, so I don't have to keep updating that URI across all of my tests. And then for this particular test, so I created what I call pens because we're storing animals in them. I have a left pen and then a right pen. Now, what does this look like in the code, just so you can see that? So go back to the Solution Explorer, my demo Blazor app, under my components, and under my pages is where my drag and drop is. In this mode, you're going to see I'm using the mud Blazor controls. I am using what's called the mud drop zone to make it easier to facilitate the drag and drop capabilities. This is where I have the available and the Sudoku identifiers. So the available roster and Sudoku's pen. So I have my animals versus all the animals that are available are in two different pens or two different containers, or in this case, code-wise speaking, they're in two different mud drop zones. And so I'm going to be able to move between the two. And then the other thing I want to show, so this is the logic for what happens when you're moving the item. These are my starting items. But then in the test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look specifically at the dragon, because this is a play on the dragon name. And we're going to move it from the left pen to the right pen, and then also go backwards. Now, some things to note with my test. You're going to see that I use this Page.locator, and then I do have to use a CSS selector. So going back to Cameron's question about no CSS selectors or XPath, they highly discourage it. However, there are mechanisms that you can use. So this is the page locator, and I'm using the CSS selector syntax for getting the identifiers for the left pen and right pen. Again, those identifiers, if we look at the code, are these things right here. They render in the HTML as identifier attributes. And so this is what I had to use in order to get the container part. So I can easily grab these headings. Those are unique fields that I could get by value. But the container, that's why I had to jump over to getting a locator, is because I wanted to get the containers themselves. Well, you can drag to a heading, and because that heading is within the container, it would allow the drop just fine. All right, so we're going to go to the URL. So we're going to the drag and drop page. I want to do some expectations up front, just to make sure that our starting conditions are really what we assume them to be. So I'm going to assume that the dragon's in the left pen, and it is not in the right pen. So first, I'm going to do the expect. Now these expects, just so you can see, they come with Playwright. These are the Playwright assertions. If you're looking on the Playwright site for documentation, they have a section dedicated to assertions. And all of the .NET ones as of, at least currently, so it is November 28th, 2023, as we record this. So all of the .NET assertions automatically have the waits and retries built in. We don't have to put any of that in our code, but other than the keyword of await. But then we're going to check to see, all right, does our left pen container, and I had to figure out how they do contains, because contains is one of those that I saw as non-retry assertions for other APIs. And what I ended up doing is I did get the container and then check to see if it's got this text at all. And so the emoji being a Unicode character, it's able to search the text for the emoji. So that was the first assertion I did, was make sure that it's in the left one, but also make sure that it's not in the right one. And that's so you can see that there is the ability to use not. So it's expect, and I'm going to expect that this particular locator does not have what I'm looking for. So make sure that that dragon isn't there. So these are my initial expectations. Then I'm going to say, all right, get by the text, find it, and then this drag to async. So Playwright can do the drag for you, which is awesome because it makes it easier when we have to deal with drag and drop functionality. And then I'm going to check the container to make sure that the text is there. I could check to make sure that it's also no longer in the left container. That would just be another expect line. Then I'm going to move it back and do the same thing. Check to make sure that it's in the expected container. Now I want to uncomment out my Page.PauseAsync so we can step through this so you can see the drag and drop happen. It's people I've talked with when it comes to automating front end, drag and drop seems to be a painful experience. So I'm going to go to test and let's debug our tests. Okay. You did see the counter blink and go away. It ran the counter test. I had commented out the Page.PauseAsync on that particular test, so that's why it didn't stop there. However, we are stopped here. How do I know where I'm at? I'm looking at the drag me moves to drop zone test. We're looking specifically for the dragon, and we've got 2 pens. So let's go ahead and we're going to step through. So we're on the Page.PauseAsync. Next, we're going to go to the URI. All right, now that we're on this page, notice that it's already looking at the left container. And does it contain our dragging text, the dragon? Now, keep in mind with .NET, these assertions are not soft assertions. These are hard assertions. So if it wasn't there, this test would fail right away. .NET does not have soft assertions, but Playwright for TypeScript does. Again, those soft assertions allow multiple assertions in the test, but the failures all get aggregated and the failure message displays at the very end. All right, so if I go to the next step, okay, we went to the next step. Notice now it's looking at the right pen to make sure that it doesn't contain it. Now that red dot, so this is the element that we will be dragging. And it's going to go over to the right pen. So what you're going to see here when I step is you should see the drag to async get executed. Notice that my dragon is now in my pen, over in Sudoku's pen. I'll go ahead and step through again. So we're so far so good. We're still here in the debugger, which means that these are passing. Next is going to be grab that element again. Notice red dot is on the dragon, so we know which element it's going to take. All right, now we want to move it to the left pen. So we're going over to where the red dot is. And then did it move our dragon friend? Our dragon friend is in there. Now, mind you, this test is not checking anything with the order, like where did it go? You could do things like that, but this is just to show you the basics for how does it deal with drag and drop. Can you do this? Yes, and make it very easy to select your items and do this. All right. So we've looked at our simple web interaction. We've looked at our drag and drop demo. So then the next one I want to show you is code generation. And what does Codegen look like? Now the reason why I'm going to show this one is because it's important to understand how Playwright uses locators and how it finds things for us, because we may not necessarily know. So we'll be able to see what it looks like walking through it. All right. let's go over back to our Visual Studio. Okay. So then what we're going to look at in here is going to be the Codegen. And the way we do that, remember here, we have our developer PowerShell that we ran earlier where we did that Playwright install. So now we're going to do Playwright Codegen. Now you can do, so /Playwright, not PL, Playwright, and then Codegen. Then you can give it the URL. So I could tell it HTTP localhost :port 5266 and run. Notice when I do that, it opens the browser with the URL. If you just do Playwright Codegen, that's fine too. It'll just open up an empty browser. Some things to note with this is that here's our Playwright Inspector. It already has some code generated for us, and you will see the record. So this will record your steps along the way and generate that code for you. Let me zoom in the code a little bit, and it will bring down the log because we're not going to look at the log at the moment. We may look at locator, so take that back. So it's got some boilerplate there. Now that said, the main thing I need to caution you about this code generation, it will generate the code for you, but you have to remember to copy it and save it to a new class because there is no save option on this menu. If I come here, you can see right now we're working in a C# library. We want NUnit, for example. So we can tell it whatever API we want to write, and it'll adjust the code accordingly. Now this is automatically going to be recording, so I can say, okay, I want to go to the registration form. So notice it went and grabbed the link. And it looked for the link that has registration. And then it clicked it. So this is going to get the locators for me, so I don't have to go, okay, how do I tell it where to go? And for me as a old school dev with the CSS selectors and XPath like ready to jump out, it took a while for me to get to this point where I'm just like, you know what? Let me use Codegen for a while to let it figure out for me, how am I going to get these things? All right, so my badge name, I'm going to ignore this. And notice that there's the validation. So now I can check and see what's the validation. As I'm clicking, notice that it's getting more like here, find the text box, find the first one, find the nth one. So now you get to see how does it generate those locators. See, is the badge name required? Nth one, click async. So these are the things that it's doing. So what's nice about Codegen is it'll tell you how it finds the elements. So I could be like, let's go back. My badge name is Saduki. And then I confirm that that message is gone. And how does it know where to find these things? So now you're seeing, sometimes it doesn't get by role. Sometimes it doesn't get by text. Sometimes we're using the locators. And that's why you saw me using the locators in the previous demo to get those containers. Because sometimes it's not as simple get by role. And so then you can see regular expression are things that it supports as well. And then you can see whenever you fill in something, it'll do a fill async and it captures your text. My password is just 1. It doesn't seem to like that. So you can come back in here and see. Come on. So you can see what am I typing in my passwords. You can see that I'm pressing tab, so you can do key presses as well. I could say that my password is actually password 123 exclamation point and password 123 exclamation point. And if you don't believe that that's what I was typing, we can go and look at the code generation. And you can see that my password is password 123 exclamation point. So it's capturing every one of my moves as we go. How does it handle radio buttons? How does it know, you know what? I want to just validate it now so I get those failure messages. Validate it. Meal preference is there. I must consent to the code of conduct is there. How does it refer to those? Okay. If I reset my validation, I want to make sure that that is clear. So as you're going through the Codegen, you want to think it through like, okay, if I did this, what do I expect? If I did this, what would I expect? So think of all the actions that you'd take because you'll have to add the assertions or those expects afterwards. So then if I say maybe I'm fasting, so no meal, and I agree to code of conduct and validate. Oh, my email is required. Oh, my email is sarah.dudkiewicz@nimblepros.com. So now I should pass validation, validate, we're good to go, and it's clear. Now, I could just go ahead and close this and be like, oh, cool, it did some code generation. But the minute I close it, all that work is lost. And I think this is one of the gotchas I see with this that kind of is frustrating is that there is no save here. However, there is the copy button. So I'm going to copy, and you can see that you can assert values, but and I'm going to assert visibilities and such. But again, there's no save. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And then I'm going to go back into my Visual Studio. And I'm going to go into my Solution Explorer. And I'm going to my tests, Blazor tests, add a class. And this is just going to be registration test. CS. And this is going to inherit my Blazor page test. If you're doing this out of the box, you would just inherit the page test. And I'm going to tell it it's fine. Oh, not on the namespace, on the class. There. Notice I added my usings, make this public. And then paste, oh, not that. Go back to my Playwright Inspector. Copy that, then paste it. That way we don't lose all the work it did. So now that I've pasted it, now I need to go ahead and refactor it. So like these using statements don't belong here. They actually go up here and so on. So you can use Codegen to then create your test and go through the steps, and you can be like, okay, does this actually happen? Given I do this, assert that this appears, and so on. For me with Codegen, I use it specifically to generate these locators. So whether it's using a locator with one of the built-in methods, so you'll notice as I hover over get by role, it returns an iLocator. Same thing with get by text, it will also be an iLocator. So these locators are finding the elements on the page. But because I don't use Playwright on all of my projects all the time, I like using Codegen to remind me, okay, how does it generate the locator for this? The other thing is that I come from the land of JavaScript pre-frameworks. And so CSS locators, I get that. jQuery showed up and I fell in love with CSS locators. So my brain knows the CSS selectors and using those for locators. So I have to try to avoid that because that is not what they want. They want you to do this by the visibility and by things that the user can see. All right, so we did a demo of the simple, I click a button, text updates. We did a demo of drag and drop. We've done this demo here. And then the last one I want to show is testing with different browsers. So what's nice is you can do different browser tests. And if you're not trusting it, you can always turn it so that it's running without being headless. So you can run this via the command line. Their demos and documentation will show it as like this, assuming that your run settings files are within your command. When I run it, I usually do .NET test from within my test project, and my run settings files live in my solution level. So you'll see me do -- settings, : and then the path to the run settings. These run settings are using the same XML that you see for the .run settings that Visual Studio uses. So you're going to see syntax similar to this. Minus that bullet point on the XML declaration. There's no bullet points in XML declarations. But the XML all the way down, that's a classic run settings thing. There are other options that you can put in there, and this is all within the Playwright documentation. But we're going to try to keep it simple for today, as we only have an hour. So let's take a look at what you can do with testing with different browsers. So come back into here. I'm going to just save this so we don't lose it. I'm going back into my command window. So this is the one that's running the application. So then, not this one. Okay, fine. Give me a new one. I want to go into my tests. And as I mentioned, and I'll show in Solution Explorer, just so you can see. So I am in my tests project in the command line, but I have the run settings here in the solution. With my run settings, just so that there's transparency, my Chromium is currently set to run headless. So it's supposed to just run them. Firefox will not run headless, so you should be able to see the browsers pop up. And my WebKit is set to run headless. I'm going to say, no, I want to see the browser as well. Because you want to see what Playwright is doing when it's testing these other browsers. I have Chrome installed on my machine. I do have Edge installed on my machine. I don't remember if I have Firefox installed on my bare metal. But I can run these Firefox tests with Playwright because it has its own set of browsers. All right, so I'm in my command line. In my test project, I'm going to do .NET space test. That was -- settings : ... And the first one I want to do is Firefox.run settings. Oh, because of this test, because I don't have all the usings and stuff, I am just going to comment it all out. Okay, let's try this again. All right, so I've got the .NET test, -- settings. I go up a folder to the solution level, get those Firefox run settings. It finds the test file. Again, Firefox, I said, don't run headless. I want to actually see it open the browser. And because I left a Page.PauseAsync uncommented out, I should hit the debugger. I'm just going to tell it to go ahead and play. And so you can see we have passing tests with Firefox. If I want to do this via WebKit, I can. Now, let me give you a cool tip with this. You see that I'm running this via command line. If you see me running anything via command line, you can start to get those gears thinking of, oh, I wonder if we can automate this and include these in our CI/CD pipelines. Yes, you can. And in fact, if you're going to do that, I highly advise that they run headless because you don't want the headed versions going in your CI/CD. Every now and then I have this where this particular one times out, and then if I run through and step through it, it's fine. But it is only on Firefox that I have these issues with this. So the question of, have I had issues with headless? I don't usually have issues with headless unless I have issues with the test failing in headless. Yeah, in terms of wonky UI testing, if it fails in headless, it'll also fail in headed, or it should. So I very rarely have an issue with headless. I prefer headless because of the CI/CD part of it. So my Firefox is having issues. Notice here it's failing on a block until completed, wait for completion. So something just didn't respond in a timely fashion for the drag and drop. but this is the only test that fails is when I run it in Firefox. If I run it in, we just saw that I did it with WebKit. WebKit, I'm gonna tell it to go. Does its thing. It's a timeout issue there as well. So I see the timeout issues every now and then, but it's usually a wonky UI thing. It's the fragility of UI testing that I'm used to, regardless of whether it's Playwright or Selenium or any other front-end unit, front-end testing framework. So you could see, again, this .run settings is specifically Visual Studio. And it is looking specifically for .run settings. So that's why it is named the way it is. All right. Now, other features that it supports, it does support doing responsive web checks via emulation. Again, due to time, we're not going to show the demos, but be aware these are capabilities you can use. So you can use different devices with their user agents and viewports. You can do some touch tests as well. Other things include geolocation, permissions. If there's an offline mode, you can check for that as well. You can do with light mode versus dark mode testing. All right, so in terms of best practices, when you're working with Playwright, what should you do? You only want to test what the users can see. That's the whole point of using Playwright for the UI testing and the end-to-end UI experience. So test what they can see. Test only what you control to. Only test your code, and that goes whether it's you're doing front-end testing or unit testing, integration testing, functional testing. Don't write code to test other people's code. Test your interactions with their code. Test to make sure that your code is doing what you expect it to do. With Playwright, use the locators. So use the Playwright Inspector to help you generate it with the Codegen. But you want to use the locators to find those elements rather than using XPath, rather than using CSS selectors. Use their chaining, use their filtering, as you saw in the demo code. Again, use the Codegen tools, and there are also plugins out there that can help you with generating those locators. If you're using Visual Studio Code, there are plugins for it as well. The demos you saw me today, I was running in Visual Studio by itself, but you can run these in code. You want to use web first assertions. Think of it as what the user sees and how they see that and what they expect the text to say, for example. Because we're on the internet, because you don't know who your end users are necessarily, you know that it's a wild, wild west of browsers. They've gotten a little bit better over the years, over the decades, but it's still somewhat wild, wild west in terms of various devices out there. So at least test for the big three, Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit, which are the ones that Playwright supports out of the box. You can also, again, test mobile and responsive layouts, but we had to keep that out due to time. Keep your Playwright libraries updated. They're constantly working on it, adding features, adding better support. You saw that I was running these through the command line. It's because I love to encourage people, including their tests and their CI/CD pipelines, include it in the automation. Know that your tests are going to catch any issues before you deploy to production. Catch the fires in dev rather than in prod. Playwright does support parallelism and sharding. So by default, the tests are going to run in parallel. Tests within a test file are run in their order written. But you can shard these tests, and their documentation will show the command for that. When soft assertions are available, use them, because these will allow you to fail gracefully rather than immediately fail after the first failing assertion. All right, so these are what we did with Playwright today. Upcoming webinars that we'll be doing in December, we've got user experience for developers, or what I call UX, the missing piece. In January, we'll do clean architecture with .NET 8. And in February, we're doing modular monoliths and talking about what are those and how do we incorporate those. And you might want to know how to migrate to those as well. Now, Steve and I are the primary trainers that you'll see from the Nimble Pros crew. Where can you find us in action? So Steve is headed to Dev Intersection next week for doing he's got the event-driven distributed ASP.NET Core App in a Day workshop. And then he's got a few sessions. He will be at CodeMash as well. He's got a 4-hour workshop. He's collaborating with Brendan Enrick on for mastering TDD and legacy code. Then he's got 2 sessions. You'll find me at CodeMash. I'm doing an event storming pre-compiler. It's 4 hours of sticky notes and conversations and learning how to leverage this in your environment to have better conversations and better software development. We have other webinars available on demand, including we've done Clean Architecture with .NET 7, Intro to DDD, Real World CI/CD, Domain Storytelling, Event Storming, Spec Flow. All of these webinars are made available after we deliver them. Feel free to check it out on our Nimble Pros website under the events. We have links to the individual ones on demand as well. And then if you're interested in learning more, or if you need help with things such as implementing DDD or domain-driven design, or if you need help upgrading to .NET 8, or how to incorporate CI/CD in your work environment, or if you need any training for your development, feel free to contact us and we'll be glad to talk with you on how we might be able to solve your needs. All right. Thank you very much.